Good afternoon, and welcome to the CyLab seminar series. This is a CyLab Business Risk Forum event, and we're very happy to have Lawrence Dietz with us. I'm very happy, too, because he's a colleague of mine for many years, and we've spent a long time discussing the nature of information warfare and other subjects over the years. So I'll stick to the official biography. It's safer that way. Lawrence Dietz, General Counsel and Managing Director, Information Security and Legal Services, Tal Global, and Adjunct Professor for American Military University, has over 30 years of diversified military and commercial information security experience. He worked at Symantec and also is a well-respected market analyst. He worked with Giga, Zona, and some other groups. And he's also a licensed attorney in the state of California, but I don't want you to hold that against him. And he's a recognized authority in compliance as such. He's lectured internationally, including at NATO and other places. He's retired as a colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve, where assignments included a variety of intelligence and PSYOPs positions. And he has a very authoritative blog on psychological operations, which is psyopregiment.blogspot.com, and I recommend it to you if you're interested in that kind of subject matter. The title of the talk is Civilian Perspective on Cyber War. One little housekeeping note. You'll see the black buttons in front of you. If you want to ask a question, please press the black button so that everybody can hear you, and everybody tuning in over the internet, our partners, CyLab corporate partners, can hear you. So now let's welcome Larry Dietz.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks for the free pizza I'm not going to have. Thanks for drinking all the Diet Dr. Pepper before I got there. I majored in pizza when I was in college. How many engineering majors do we have here? Okay, in the interest of full disclosure, I started out in engineering. I had a GPA of 1.4921, which for you seniors, that's not really good. Okay, I switched into business administration and doubled my IQ. I don't know why that is. It just worked out. Then, because I know academics is very important to, as we say, the Southern plural, all y'all, I have an MBA from Babson. I have a Master of Science in Strategic Studies from the Army War College down the road here in Carlisle. And I have a master's degree in European Union Law from the University of Leicester in the UK. I'm a licensed attorney, and how many of you have seen Judge Judy? As my pro bono work, I'm a volunteer judge in the small claims court. So I have a little bit of fun. And the purpose of today's presentation is to alter your perspective on cyber war. Given the fact that you're all highly technical people and that you all sit in the back of the room, that shows me not exactly people-oriented people, perhaps. And I was explaining to two of your colleagues this morning, suppose you're sitting at your desk, fat, dumb, and happy, and a bunch of guys with no waists and uniforms come in and kind of push you out of your seat. Everybody talks about cyber war. How many people have been in the military? Air Force can't count for this purpose. Okay. Not too many. How many people have received what was called in the day HFP, hostile fire pay? Ooh, and he's sitting in the front. That tells you something. Okay. So I'd like to share with you not only my love of electronic toys, which I happen to discover this, but there's, when people think of cyber war, the part that comes to mind is the military, the executive branch. That's what we think of. From a technological perspective, what is among the most difficult things to do with respect to an attack? Don't all talk out at once. It makes me nervous. I'll give you a hint. attribution. It is very, very hard, if not impossible, to figure out who the dirtbag is that is your attacker. And depending on who the attacker is, the consequences that flow from that attack are all going to be different, right? So, the guy showed me how to do this, but I wasn't paying attention. At the top of the list, potential attackers are nation states. And who is in the news with the capability, not necessarily having done, with the capability to execute a cyber attack? What countries of the world? U.S. Good answer. Excellent. Low risk, politically correct answer. How about some others? China? How about some others?
Russia?
Russia? Some others? France? Oui. After the class, if you're interested in a short dissertation on combat rations of different countries, see me after class, okay? If you're going to war, hint, go with the Italians and the French, okay, if you want to eat. Okay, what are the countries? A couple of more.
Israel and Iran.
Israel, Iran. So we have a couple, and there's probably some others, right? What about those guys? Not necessarily the most forthcoming, but you never know. And what about, I don't know, what about these guys? What about these guys? Help me with this one. Venezuela.
Easy.
Close enough for government work, right? So that's nation states. Then we have blank page, what I'll call non-state actors. And I'll help you out here. That would be one. So we have a bunch of non-state actors. Then at the next level, we have organized crime. Then we have individual crime. And then we have activists. Now, how many of you have studied or are familiar with attack methodologies, cyber attack methodologies? I think I can say that cyber attack methodologies, kind of like IBM's marketing strategy, are lowering the skill level of the user. In other words, you do not have to be a Unix weenie to execute an attack. You do not have to be a graduate engineer to cause harm in somebody's IT infrastructure. Make sense? Okay, so perspective is important here. Now this very, very simple little PowerPoint slide, I think, goes to the essence of dealing with various personnel. How many of you have actually read the published memorandum between DHS and DOD dealing with cooperation between the Cyber Command and DHS? Let me tell you, as an attorney, a retired colonel who's been in the InfoSec biz a while, what an exercise in nonsense. I mean, I have it, and just to show you, I'm going to circulate it. I'll ask for it back. Now, I know you're college people. My wife's a retired professor, so I know how that goes. So I'm going to start it with Virgil and send it back. This is the actual memo. The outlining is mine. And what it basically says is we're going to exchange people. We're not going to boss each other's people around. And we're still in charge of ourselves. Have a nice day. So it begs the question of who is totally in charge. Okay, so one of the issues is in a cyber attack, you have an employer to whom you owe your allegiance, if other parties come into your data center, your network operations center, who is the authority figure? Can government personnel, excuse me, be they military, federal, local, or large guys with sunglasses with no perceptible ID, what should they be permitted to do? What do you have to let them do? So this is kind of a little eye chart, but I'm going to lead you through it. I put in 4 major categories here: motivation, overriding mission. What is the debilitating factors? What things are harmful in the reference frame? And I'm using military and commercial here. And what are the rules governing? So under the military, the motivation is, of course, national security, right? That's the motivation. Accomplish the mission. Now, since most of you have not been in the military, I'm going to take you through an order that any unit, any military unit, Joint Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, deployed for an operation will work under. This is their rules. This is their roadmap. This is how they work. And since most of you will not be in the military but may come in contact with military personnel, particularly in the context of cyber war, which the President has already de facto stated there is a cyber command. It's run by a 4-star general whose what's the 4-star general in charge of cyber command's day job? Dernza. Virgil, you're very good at this.
Well, concerning
You can hit your button.
concerning your memo, the one that you just passed, there is an act of Congress now that's being put through for the formation of a national cybersecurity and communication center, which is supposed to sit on the top of all these organizations, including DHS and NSA. This is an act which was written by Senator Lieberman, Collins, and someone else who I don't recall. And it's with a GAO now for pricing. So you might want to help them.
Oh, yeah. Well, the fact that Congress is working to solve this problem sure makes me feel good. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I have to speak up. All right, Nick and I are actually with the Department of Homeland Security.
Hooah!
Thank you. As far as the NKIC goes, we're not going to be over NSA, and we desperately needed an umbrella.
The center, not you. The center will be...
Right. And the whole idea behind the NKIC, from an incident response perspective, is to be able to collaborate and communication share with the DoD side, NSA, and all the other departments and agencies that we work with, including the public and private sector as well. So just wanted to clarify, make sure nobody thinks that we're going to be over them.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, but the national center will be the coordinating body.
Yes.
Right? So you are part of the center, is part of the rest of the energy, all. I don't know if you've seen it.
People are going to have to see those tools. Yes.
So that's going to be the coordinating.
So the communication center is a joint operations center where personnel from the different entities will sit together and have situational awareness and a common operating picture. Is that correct? So would that be a summary of what it would do? The person who runs this, is he going to be, or is she going to be a 5-star general? Who does this, who?
We have the director.
Okay, so this is a director who's a DHS person. So that is essentially a staff coordinating entity. Has no line authority. No line authority. It's not going to tell NSA what to do, and it's sure as hell not going to tell General Alexander what to do. right? So now we have yet another organization. We have a focal point saying, this is what's happening in an objective vein. Right? That's what we hope. Okay, so let's follow the game here. This is going better, actually going better than I thought. So the military guys will be working off an op order that I'm going to show you. DHS is going to be working from guidance from the secretary. And President Obama is going to be shooting hoops, right? He's this really smart guy. If something cyber is going on, he will be intellectually attracted. Never met the man. I did vote for him, but I have never met him. And he's a smart guy. He'll be attracted intellectually, which may or may not screw things up. But we'll continue the march here. So a bad thing for the military is if somebody gets killed. That's a real bad thing. Okay? Now, I'll digress here and I'll tell you a bad thing for some of the people on the military operation is getting a bad efficiency report. So, going back to this nice little picture here, if I'm down here, my loyalty is to work up here. If I'm down here, my loyalty is to work up there. Right? Okay? Okay. So then, what are the rules? What is the military doing? Well, there's classified rules of engagement, not published. Or it may be classified because they don't exist. Because there are just too many scenarios, too many variables. If the nature of attack is an exploitation attack, well, let me back up a second. In the military parlance, we have computer network operations, which is cyber war. We have computer network attack. Everybody can kind of figure out what that one is. We have computer network defense. We can kind of figure out what that one is. And yet we have my personal favorite, the bestest one, computer network exploitation. Under computer network exploitation is the insertion of code and potentially individuals to exploit the information assets of the target, whether it is the trade secrets of Cisco or Pfizer or the attack plans of the 101st Airborne. The mission is to exploit the assets, the information assets. CNE is not necessarily an attack. It is not going to trigger the law of war. So what can a military entity do, particularly if the site of the attack is domestic? Reason for the CYA memo. Just speculation. Okay? So the point is that the law of war will apply some of the time, but not all the time. Now let's look on the commercial side. Well, we want to protect the value of the company. The value of the company can come in the reputation of the company, so that if the First National Bank of, I don't know, Pocatello, Idaho, gets a computer hit, is that a real big economic issue? Probably not. If Bank of America's computers are down and you can't get money out of your ATM, that's a really big deal. Their reputation will suffer. If there's a breach and personally identifiable information, the great state of California has defined legally personally identifiable information as that information which can be used by someone to steal your identity, then if the personally identifiable information is exposed, reputation of the company goes down, the stock value goes down, and having worked for a publicly held corporation, Symantec, for 6 years, I can tell you the CEO is most concerned with that stock price, the value of that company. There's nothing more important to that CEO. And so there is a protection thing. So what do companies want to do? Well, they want to maximize their value. They want to protect information. They want to comply with the law because mostly they don't want to be in the newspaper in the courtroom. What's a catastrophic failure? The company goes under. That's debilitating. And what are they governed by? They're governed by an incredible morass of laws, regulations, and standards. Some of which are mandatory, most of which are voluntary, some of which are conflictory. So having said all that, What is the 5-paragraph operations order? I have the opportunity a couple of times a year. I get to work for a defense contractor, and I know you guys are not going to believe this. I get paid to pretend I'm a grumpy colonel. It's true, and I'm real good at it, and I enjoy it. So even when you're in a large, sophisticated organization run by admirals or generals, this is the content of the rules of how the task force is going to operate. Now, based on one of the things we've talked about so far, what is a key problem that you can see right away? I'll give you a hint. It's towards the top.
Attribution is hard.
Attribution is hard. Who is the enemy? Who is the enemy? If the enemy is a nation state, we go down one path. If the enemy is a non-state actor, we go down another path. If the enemy, excuse me, is organized crime, another, and so on and so forth. So enemy situation is difficult. Another one that you may not think of is the friendly situation from, where are my information science majors? Okay, information science guys. I know you're out there. Okay. If you work for a large organization and you want a complete picture of every piece of IT that's hooked up to the network at any point in time, can you get one? Absolutely not. So I go into a mission, I have no idea who the enemy is, and I'm not really sure of the friendly situation. Now, if I'm an adversary, let's do the adversary. If I do an adversary and I'm internet-based, I'm going to do a bunch of scans to identify targets. Then I'm going to do some scans to identify not scans, I'm going to do some research to match the vulnerabilities against those targets. Then I'm going to look at my inventory of exploits, and I'm going to match that against what in the heck it is I'm trying to accomplish. Now that to me is a lot cleaner battle plan than I don't know who the bad guy is and I don't know what the friendly landscape looks like. So the question is, what do we know about the Cyber Command so far? And I can assure you this will be my last Cyber Command slide. I use employment ads. I think they're a pretty good source of intelligence because they tell me what kind of people the organization is looking for. And if I know what kind of people the organization is looking for, I know what kind of capabilities they have or trying to have. And so these are the capabilities being looked for. Do we see any mystery there? No. Do we see anything that kind of sticks out? Strategic analysis. I have yet to see an IT department that does strategic analysis. Most of them are so busy dealing with Microsoft Tuesday that they don't have time to get out of their own way. So strategic analysis, long-range planning. The military differs from the civilian sector in another way, and that is that they have contingency plans. They have very detailed contingency plans and contingency operations in terms of what will I do if this happens? What will I do if North Korea invades South Korea? What will I do if Iran shoots a nuke at Israel? Contingency plans on the shelf. Most commercial organizations, and the buzzword, of course, is critical infrastructure and key resources. That's what we're concerned with here. The critical infrastructure and key resources, many of those entities do not have contingency plans other than the mandatory stuff they need for occupational safety and health, or they've constructed based on where they are. So if they're in San Francisco, maybe they got an earthquake plan. If they're in a floodplain, maybe they got a flood plan. But they don't have contingency plans for cyber attacks by any of the parties that we've looked at so far. Okay. So before I do that, one of the unfortunate facts of life is that PowerPoint has become the lingua franca, the working language of a lot of large organizations. And it's a blessing and a curse. So I've come up with a methodology that I'm going to leave for your study, because I know you'll post the slides here somewhere. And I've simplified it into 4 little interrelated circles. And you can start nearly anywhere in the circle. And the intent of this methodology and the mind map that I'm going to show you in pieces after I show you the big one and you go, holy cow, I can't read that. The intent is to provide a process that might be some food for thought. Okay? So, conceptually, you always start with preparation. But in today's world, the operations tempo is so fast that people are just kind of keeping up. And it almost doesn't matter what business you're in, from the nonprofit to the multinational to the government. Then you have to be able to detect attacks and threats. How many of you have ever gone to the RSA conference in San Francisco? Okay. The RSA conference in San Francisco, held February, March, is the largest information security show in the United States. Typically held at Moscone Center in San Francisco. Parenthetically, not a bad place to go. And draws 10,000 people. Would that be fair, would you say? It's the biggest. And it has a couple of hundred vendors. They change every year because the information security market, and I have one of my distinguished colleagues here who's an authority on marketing in that market, has an incredible churn. We have some big guys at the top that make products that help detect. My former employer, Symantec for one. And it is not necessarily an easy business to get into, nor one that's lucrative, nor one that has a lot of standards. Nor is there an overarching solution, particularly since the threats against organizations are more than one dimension. So you need more than one kind of detection. Then once you figure out how you're being attacked, you have to defend it. And I'll go into that in a little bit. And there are legal consequences depending on who the attacker is. Pretty simple? Okay. Notwithstanding my sterling performance in engineering 1.4921, of course, that's pretty recent, so you can imagine I was a freshman in college pretty recently, so that number sticks in my mind. That is a mind map of the process I'm going to go over. Why? Because I tend to think in terms of patterns. So that's the big picture, and let's look at it a little piece at a time. Okay. Detect. As good a place to start as any. General situational awareness. Well, hooray, hooray, hooray. This is a good idea. You need to have general situational awareness, and the corollary to that is you need to have a common operating picture. What is the purpose of detection? Purpose of detection. The purpose of detection is to provide information to the technical and management decision makers so they can decide what in the hell to do. So, if I tell somebody, Mr. President, we have 50,000 bona fide intrusion attempts. And we think it's coming from Uzbekistan, based on the IP, but we can't be sure. How helpful is that in making a decision? Not real very helpful. So part of the process of detection needs to go to the end of the detection pipeline, which is having information that allows a decision maker to make a decision. On the technical side, how many of you are aware of the acronym SEIM? Security Enterprise Information Management. For some people, this is the holy grail. And when I was at Symantec, I remember memorizing a litany of being able to take extremely large amounts of events, distilling them into common incidents, and then being able to determine the proper defense to the incidents, because the detection has to tell me what the bad guys are doing so that I have a technical measure. Is it malicious code? Is it an intrusion? What exactly is involved, and how does this relate to the big picture? Well, defect and defend are totally related. Defending means we want to stop the attack, mitigate the harm, and learn by it so we do not get attacked the same way again. As a byproduct of that, I have coined this new term, combat forensics. Combat forensics. In my current role at Tal Global, I get to manage very complex and technically interesting investigations. Most of these, if not all of them, occur after the fact. After the fact. We think employee A is stealing trade secrets because they're going to be riffed and we know they're going to work for our competitor. When did this happen? Well, they were rifted about 2 months ago. Hello, we have discovered that our long-term trusted controller has embezzled $300,000. We need to find out how. When we're called in, it's after the fact. What's the point? The point is that network forensics and forensics on systems probably need to be in place all the time in selected environments, because that's the only way you're going to find out what in the heck happened. Okay, that's the defense piece. The prepare piece. This is probably the most complex. And it's so complex, even I must put my glasses on. Okay, the defense piece, the top of the chart is the information security awareness. Vulnerability assessment, policy and procedure review, information and physical penetration testing. So I have to, as the Information Security Command, as the Network Operations Center, I have to know the state of my network, the state of my IT, what their vulnerabilities are. And there are a number of vendors out there who would be delighted to sell you an array of hardware and software designed to tell you what they are, because the statistics are overwhelming that most attacks use existing vulnerabilities, not unknown vulnerabilities. There's also the contra principle, which is new attacks are highly targeted. And highly targeted implies inside knowledge, either current or former insiders, probably technologically astute current or former insiders. The policies and procedures implies that you as an organization have war gamed what in the heck it is you're going to do and how the rules of the road go. And then last but not least on that first branch, legal and standards audit. Does the organization need to be compliant with the appropriate standards? A couple of my favorite acronyms, NERC and FERC, HIPAA, HITECH, PCI, all that good stuff. Government Enforcement Liaison Plan. This ties into who is the dirtbag. Because depending on who the dirtbag is, the law enforcement entity will be different. And I'll talk about legal consequences in a minute, but just to show you the layers, we have federal, and federal is defined as defense and non-defense, federal law enforcement. Then we have an array of other federal folk that I think I've put on my last slide. people you might not think of. Oh, no, different talk. I do have it in here. Secret Service. How many people watch television on Tuesday night? How many of you have a television? Okay. NCIS. Air Force has an investigative service. Army has one. All the services have one. Then I have state and county. Different states have different depth of resources. The great state of California has the California Emergency Management. No, they do not have the California Bureau of Investigation. That is false for those of you who watched The Mentalist on Thursday. Then there are local government. City of San Jose has, as you might expect, computer crime capability. So organizations need to understand what to do when they are approached by various entities. Now, General Counsel will understand the word of subpoena. Subpoena is a document from a court that says you're not involved in this lawsuit, but you have information or documents that need to be provided. And you need to have contingency plans based on the kind of the attacker. And you need to go through training. I have classroom, online, and exercises. 3 levels of exercises. Tabletop, that means in a little classroom. Functional command post, that's where different departments are represented in a little bit more demanding environment. And full participation, where things happen. So you're in an organization, and the drill is your data center has just been flooded. You need to shut down that data center and activate your alternative site. Okay? Now this training, unfortunately, doesn't occur a lot, even in the most sophisticated environments. We do get fractional training. You get some physical security training where you have exercises conducted by law enforcement. Last Sunday, I got to watch people rappel down an air shaft in the Transamerica building and then rescue hostages being held by bad guys. Believe it or not, it's more fun than writing Unix commands. It really is, and it's a lot louder. Okay, so you have a variety of training and outside resources and partner agreements. Who do I have to work with? Okay. Legal consequences here. I've already talked ad nauseum a little bit about national security. Suppose the attacker is not a nation state. What's triggered? Well, there may be some crimes, and there might be some money or other assets stolen, and I, as the victim, the corporate victim, I want my damn money back. So I'm going to have to go through civil action in court against this defendant or defendants, which implies I was smart enough to gather the evidence while things were going on, to gather and preserve that evidence in such a way that even the smartest of my brothers and sisters in the legal profession could not get that evidence thrown out of court. Okay? And that actually is saying a lot, particularly since most courts are not exactly technologically savvy. And while there are federal rules and state rules of discovery concerning electronically stored information, ESI, they're not necessarily universally followed. And if you are taking something to a jury, you have to have evidence that is not only admissible, but can be explained to the layman. How many of you ever saw the movie The Departed? Okay, that was a good movie, shoot-'em-up movie. And there's one line where I think it's Matt Damon is talking to the female lead, and she says to him, I heard you're going to law school. Where are you going? And he says, I'm going to Suffolk Law School. This is in Boston. Happens to be where I went. And she says, why aren't you going to Harvard? And he says, Harvard is closed during the day. So it's a night school. So one of my professors for criminal law, when he talked about a jury, he said, picture 12 fire hydrant painters in the jury box. because a fire hydrant painter is not clever enough to have an excuse to get out of jury duty. So you have to make your arguments to a jury really, really simple. And so the running assumption is I have collected legally admissible evidence that I can have an expert explain to a jury of fire hydrant painters. So the legal consequences are not trivial. I think we talked about that. Okay, who can be involved? This is just another list. I think we talked about that one enough. Okay, here are some alternative scenarios. I don't know who the bad guy is. So if I don't know who the bad guy is, what courses of action do I need to take? Well, the normal legal guideline is generally prudent under the circumstances. What does that mean? At the risk of quoting President Clinton, it depends, you know. And unfortunately, things that happen today are sometimes judged by environments 5 or 6 years down the road. So I would say if you have an unconfirmed attacker identity, you have to assume the worst. It's just like when you troubleshoot a technical problem, you do the simple thing first. Assume the worst. If I have a nation-state actor and I'm a commercial entity, do I have to notify the federal authorities? And if so, which ones? Now, if I am a power company, an airline, a rail, marine, bank, any big organization in the critical infrastructure, I should have already been involved in the information sharing thing, the ISAC, and so I know that if I'm a bank, the Treasury Department is the, as they say in federal lingo, the daddy rabbit of that particular entity, and transportation, and so on and so forth. So in theory, if I'm part of the critical infrastructure or key resources, excuse me, I have already pre-identified the federal government entity that I am working with, and have already established a relationship. If it is a nation-state attacker, can I identify that? Maybe not. But rest assured, if countries like Australia, which we didn't even put on our chart, has already acknowledged that they monitor an incredible amount of their commercial infrastructure, if Australia's Department of Defense, which is little teeny, give you an idea, somebody once told me there are less than 50 attorneys in the Australian military. Less than 50. Why is that? I don't know. But the fact is that they need to understand, entities need to do what's going to happen. A force can come in of combined federal entity. What do I have to let them do? What do I need to do for my own protection? Clearly, I need to have some forensics going to monitor what those federal folks have done while in my premises. And if they say, classify, you can't do that, then I'm going right to get an injunction, court order, something, because that's a real problem. Need to be able to track what's going on. If it's a non-state actor, then I have to do a little bit of thinking about where it's going to go to court. Where am I going to go to court? What kind of court? Civil litigation? Criminal litigation? So that's very important. Now, what is my duty to try and maintain, to collect and maintain evidence? Well, if it's civil, it's in my best interest as a commercial entity to have the forensics to use as evidence in my action against the attacker. If it's organized crime, I'm not going to be the one taking them to court. It will be a prosecutor, a federal or a county prosecutor under various criminal statutes. Am I obligated do evidence collection for them? No. Am I obligated to turn over stuff I might have that they think might help them in their prosecution? Yeah. So if I have the organized crime or the civilian entity, that's a different legal responsibility. And if I have an identity theft ring, I'm going to be under special scrutiny because I am going to have to demonstrate that I have encrypted personally identifiable information, or that when I suspected a breach, I followed the state notification laws that I am subject to. Okay? So the alternative scenarios depend on identifying the attacker or following a path that is designed to make you look pretty smart. So, kind of going back to the beginning, by way of summary, cyber war has always been, at least most recently, looked at as terms of potential attack by a nation state. The U.S. government has responded by standing up a 4-star command under the National Security Agency with a dotted line to the Strategic Command in Omaha. The President's cabinet officer responsible for defending the homeland, including the critical infrastructure and key resources, Secretary Napolitano, the DHS, has energized her resources to work with the military. However, it is not clear where the buck stops, as my friend Harry Truman might have said, and commercial entities are under an obligation to be prepared to deal with a great deal of uncertainty in terms of who is the attacker and what, if any, federal agencies and law enforcement organizations they will be working with, whether or not they like it. So I have some time left over for general questions. Seeing no questions, hearing none from the telephone. A question. Okay, yes, ma'am.
So you're taking, you keep talking about admittedly a very military approach where you're asking for the central, you put a person in charge in the center to go and try to find all of these sort of attacks and everything else. Have you looked at all the effects of grassroots identification of attacks, where you're either presenting information to individual troops or even to first-line level managers and floating that information up?
Well, first of all, I'm not a part of the military cyber command structure, so I absolutely have no idea what in the hell they're doing. But I think from a data collection standpoint, there is a bottom-up, because if there wasn't a bottom-up, we'd have nobody to feed this center. It's not going to stand on its own. So the sensors will come in. Now, as it turns out, I did some research on the size of these entities, and I believe that, and I'd have to look it up, but the Army's increment alone is 10,000 people. So purportedly, there is an organized way of getting information from the first line, but first line, of course, in this case, may not be lowest echelon. It depends on where the sensors are and how they're arrayed, and how the military receptors overlay on the commercial infrastructure, which is 85% of the total. And my goal today was to mostly acquaint a commercial sector audience with the military perspective and raise the issues of how the military might operate under times of uncertainty, and the cyber attack scenario is certainly one of those. Does that answer the question? Partially. Okay, well, I'm afraid that's as best as I could do. Yes, yes, sir.
I'm curious as to your...
I'm curious as to your thoughts about how, under this structure and approach, the military or the nation handles the costs of being wrong in attribution and in responding. Well, that's why I said the legal definition is reasonably prudent under the circumstance, you know. And the fact of the matter is that's a really good question with really bad potential consequences. There are a lot more connected people like Richard Clarke as an example. We have a classic debate on that. We have in one corner, from the Boys Latin School in Boston, Mass., we have Richard Clarke, government person, cyber terrorist expert, who says things can go really bad and we could get really screwed. In the other corner, we have Bruce Schneier, or as I call him sometimes, Ponytail Bruce, a leading light of the information security industry who hates vendors but is a vendor, and says basically things can't be that bad because the technology is more robust than you think. The potential consequences are very, very dire because you never underestimate the low tolerance of citizenry. If I'm, and I tell this one a lot, I'm in San Jose, California, which is 40 miles from San Francisco. Airplane goes into the headquarters of the Bank of America in San Francisco. It's really tragic. I'm really sorry. I go to the corner. I get my money out of the ATM. My money doesn't come out of the ATM. It's now a problem. So if you look at the scenario of pan flu, there has been a lot of research on pan flu. How fast food would run out, how fast this would run out, how hospitals couldn't work. If you look at the scenario for pan flu, and instead of the damage being caused by people not being able to go to work, insert workers at work not being able to use their computers. And then look at the same kinds of escalating effect. So on the food chain, for example, the supermarket has so much staples but very little fresh because they depend on deliveries. If the computer systems are so screwed up that the food chain cannot replenish the milk, eggs, butter in 3 or 4 days, that'll be a real problem. And I don't believe that strategic planners have crosswalked the nature of the cascading problems in the cyber world as they have systematically in the flu world. So by way of analogy, that's my answer, which I really like. Parenthetically, the CDC hired a defense contractor by the name of MPRI to come in and write the operations plan for pan flu. Okay? And if you'd like to see the format of the operations plan for the CDC of pan flu, it looks an awful lot like that. Because the military process was applied. Okay? I can also tell you that the CDC did a research project to develop the plans for a fusion intelligence center for public health information akin to what was described for the communications center here. So there are some analogies there. Anything else? Thank you for your interest. Please eat the rest of the pizza.